Thank you for watching QTV. We take a look at stories making headlines in our news. Health Minister Dr. Chitalu Chilufya says the country has not recorded any new cases of COVID-19. The Zambia Revenue Authority ZRA has exceeded its first quarter revenue collection target of 13.1 billion kwacha by 63.7 million kwacha. And government has been urged to default on the country's external debt obligations in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. And now the news in detail. Health Minister Dr. Chitalu Chilufya has disclosed that the country has not recorded any new cases of COVID-19 from 99 samples tested in the last 24 hours. Speaking during a daily briefing on COVID-19, Dr. Chilufya says the number of confirmed cases still stands at 36, with 619 individuals tested as of 31st March 2020. He says all the 36 people that tested positive are stable except the critical individual who is on oxygen but not deteriorating. Dr. Chilufya adds that 5 alerts of possible COVID-19 cases were recorded but tested negative after being isolated at Levi Mwanawasa Teaching Hospital and have since been discharged. And Dr. Chilufya says President Lungu has ordered the recruitment of 400 doctors as well as 3,100 paramedics as a way of enhancing the response towards the fight against the pandemic. He says the president has also offered incentives to the frontline health personnel as a way of motivating them for their sacrifice to lives.
The recruitment will commence today. Further, we call upon all citizens to adhere to the measures that His Excellency President Lungu announced in order to scale up the response. Stay home, stay away from Lusaka, wash your hands, keep your environment clean. Only essential workers should be at work. Otherwise, let's work using technology. Let us ensure that we do not interrupt essential services. Let us avoid public gatherings. The health workers that are working at the front line today, I want to specifically salute you and urge you on. And as His Excellency has directed recruitment of more health workers, he has further directed that incentives be provided for the frontline health workers at the front line of this scourge in order to motivate them to support or to continue providing service. This is in recognition of the fact that these are the heroes and heroines who are protecting the nation from this public health hazard. And in appreciating you and urging you on to continue diligently serving the nation, the President has not only ordered recruitment of more staff, but has also ordered that incentives be provided for the frontline staff that are in the cause, and details shall be availed in a different setup.
And ZCCM Investment Holdings has donated an ambulance worth 100,000 United States dollars towards the fight against COVID-19. Chief Executive Osama Vuto Chipata presented the state-of-the-art Mercedes-Benz ambulance to Health Minister Dr. Chitalu Chilufya.
Health of Zambia is a charity organization led by Brendan and Portia Clark, and have been instrumental in securing various medical equipment and furniture from state-of-the-art hospitals in Perth, part of which we donated to Ndola Teaching Hospital in 2017, and we saw them donate some to UTH in June last year. The ambulance we are donating to help with the fight against COVID-19 is part of this consignment, and it is equipped with resuscitators, among other things. We would like to thank the ministry for accepting this donation, and we hope that this will go some way in fighting the scourge.
Meanwhile, Zambia Medicines Regulatory Authority Director General Bernice Mwale also presented a donation consisting a consignment of alcohol-based hand sanitizers valued at 50,000 kwacha.
One of the key interventions in effectively preventing the spread of the coronavirus through the use of alcohol-based hand sanitizers. Honorable Minister, Zambia has also continued to urge the pharmaceutical industry to ensure that all medicines and allied substances such as hand sanitizers disinfectants and medical sundries, face masks and medical gloves made available to the Zambian population meet the required set standards of quality.
The Zambia Revenue Authority has exceeded its first quarter revenue collection target for 2020 by 63.7 million kwacha. ZRA Corporate Communications Manager Topsy Skalinda says the target for the first quarter was 13.1 billion kwacha. Mr. Skalinda says in the quest to comply with the value-added tax VAT law and ensure that there is liquidity in the economy, the authority refunded a total of 2.9 billion kwacha during the just-ended quarter. He, however, states that despite the overperformance during the quarter under review, ZRA is already feeling the threat that COVID-19 poses to its revenue collection efforts, as the business environment has already been negatively affected. Mr. Skalinda says the coronavirus outbreak will have a serious negative impact on ZRA's collection in the second quarter and possibly the entire year, considering the decline in copper prices that has already affected mineral royalty tax and projections for corporate income tax from the mining sector. He has, however, stated that ZRA has no choice but to devise effective strategies to collect more revenue, as the Zambian people need government services more than ever during this pandemic.
We have managed to collect about 63.7 billion kwacha above target, which is very good, and we will continue on this path. We attribute this success to the various strategies that we've put in place as an authority, and we also did a huge refund during this period. We managed to refund about 2.9 billion kwacha, and this VAT refund is meant to just push in a bit of liquidity into the economy. As you know, most companies are struggling during this period, and we hope this will help them have a bit of liquidity to keep running.
Patriots for Economic Progress PEP President Shaun Tembo has urged government to consider immediately defaulting on the country's external debt obligations in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. Mr. Tembo says government, through the Attorney General, should consider invoking the force majeure clause in the external debt agreements and write to the creditors informing them that the COVID-19 global pandemic has brought about circumstances that make it impossible for Zambia to meet its obligations under the respective loan agreements. He says the prevailing circumstances would give the country's legal protection even if it decided to default on its external debt obligations. Mr. Tembo says defaulting on external debt can be done by suspending all payments and keeping the available funds, as well as whatever little funds the country is going to be generating to meet its domestic obligations, such as salaries, as well as the domestic debt obligations such as treasury bills and government bonds. He notes that there is a hindrance to the country's ability to generate tax and non-tax revenues, nor adequate foreign exchange from the sale of copper. Mr. Tembo states that there is no doubt that Zambia, just like many other countries across the globe, will eventually default on its debt servicing obligations in the next 2 to 6 months.
We have been closely monitoring the COVID-19 situation, both nationally as well as globally, as well as the economic impact of this pandemic. And our view is that when we look at our nation, Zambia, and given how fragile our economy has been even before the COVID pandemic, we need to ensure that we take measures to at least allow us to be financially sustainable locally, even as the COVID-19 virus actually ravages our ability to earn both foreign exchange as well as tax revenue at our borders. And in this view, our belief is that the government needs to consider immediately suspending all payments to meet our external debt obligations, and basically inform our creditors that conditions exist in this country which have prevented us from being able to meet these debt obligations externally. And this will ensure that we are able to preserve some funds to meet our domestic obligations, such as salaries. Because if we wait for us to totally deplete our reserves and our little funds available in the fiscus before we default, then that would have dire economic consequences on the country.
The Center for Trade Policy and Development, CTPD, says the measures announced by Finance Minister Wale Ngandu to mitigate the economic impact of COVID-19 are insufficient. In his recent address on the impact of the coronavirus, Dr. Ngandu stated that as part of the measures taken to mitigate the impact of COVID-19, government will release 2.5 billion kwacha towards reducing domestic arrears to suppliers, outstanding arrears to pensioners and third-party arrears, as well as additional 140 million kwacha towards local contractors in the road sector. But CTPD senior researcher Bright Chizonde says it must be noted that the dismantling of domestic arrears towards suppliers and pensioners, though able to increase liquidity, is an obligation and not a stimulus or bailout. Mr. Chizonde adds that government omitted the most important policy interventions since it failed to outline measures targeting loss in employment and reduced standards of living due to compromised macroeconomic stability. He further states that it is expected of government to reduce selected corporate and personal taxes and suspend selected withholding taxes instead of targeting tax changes with the most minimal revenue loss implications.
The Center for Trade Policy and Development notes that the tight fiscal space has greatly constrained the government's ability to safeguard macroeconomic stability and standards of living in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. The outlined economic measures recently issued by the government reflect a high focus on collecting tax revenue at the expense of the collapse of business enterprises. It is better to lose some tax revenue now while keeping many businesses afloat during and after the pandemic, as opposed to suffering permanent losses afterwards due to a widespread closure of businesses. CTPD therefore encourages government to urgently engage the IMF, World Bank and other cooperating partners for support in order to finance a meaningful economic bailout. The Center for Trade Policy and Development notes that the tight fiscal space has greatly constrained the government's ability to safeguard macroeconomic stability and standards of living in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic.
All People's Congress Party APC President Nason Musoni has charged that Zambia is nowhere near achieving the objectives of stopping the spread of averting the increase in the number of imported cases of coronavirus with wide open borders and international airports. Mr. Musoni states that prudence dictates that the country's priority should be to shut down borders and the Kenneth Kaunda International Airport immediately as a means of stopping the spread of the virus. He has advised government to expedite the implementation of the necessary measures to safeguard the public from the coronavirus pandemic. And Mr. Musoni has urged government to endeavor to be truthful with information if the fight against the coronavirus is to be won. He says government's inertia in inaccurate information dissemination is putting the whole Zambian public at risk of the pandemic.
Whereas we are happy to work with government in ensuring that we combat the spreading of the coronavirus. But it's incumbent upon this government, the Zambian government, to ensure that it does not resort to lies and deception. We think that the lies that played out clearly yet the other day clearly shows that government is not being truthful, is not forthcoming with the truth. And it will be extremely difficult to win the battle, the fight against the coronavirus, for as long as the government keeps holding back with the truth. If government needs to be economical with the truth, you cannot fight this virus when your borders are wide open. You cannot fight this virus when the only operational international airport continues to receive international passengers on a daily basis, business as usual. We think that the time has come when this government must be seen to be decisive. So we think that the strategy that the government has devised is too porous to be able to control the spreading of the coronavirus. So we urge this government for once to ensure that the borders are closed, to ensure that the only operational airport is quickly shut down in the interest of the overwhelming majority of our people. We have an obligation to secure the lives of our citizens.
The Zambian High Commission in Pretoria, South Africa, has urged Zambian citizens whose visitors' permits to that country have expired to urgently notify the mission. Zambia's High Commissioner to South Africa, Major General Jackson Miti, says the mission will engage the South African Department of Home Affairs to ensure that affected Zambians are exempted from penalties once the COVID-19-induced lockdown is over. General Miti says the South African government has since indicated that foreign nationals whose visas will expire during the lockdown period will not be declared undesirable but allowed to leave the country once the movement has been lifted. He has advised Zambians wishing to travel back to Zambia to wait until the South African government lifts the COVID-19 lockdown, expected to be reviewed on 16th April. General Miti has further advised affected Zambians who intend to submit their details to the mission to make use of the digital platforms, as physical contacts with members of staff would not be possible. South Africa is currently under a 21 days lockdown, which began on 27th March up to 16th April 2020 in a bid to contain the spread of the coronavirus. This is contained in a statement issued by Naomi Nyawali, First Secretary Press and Public Relations at the Zambian Mission in South Africa. Economist Chibamba Kanyama has advised government to reduce the cost of production by reducing the price of inputs used in production, such as fuel and electricity, so that the economy does not stall. Mr. Kanyama has told Q News that the country has the capacity to reduce the cost of inputs, pointing to the drop in crude oil prices. He states that while it may cost the country exchange rate loss, the government can pass on the small benefits to support the consumers and the economy. Mr. Kanyama says the best thing the government can do, given the challenge the coronavirus is, to do some calculations and see how citizens can benefit even in a small way. He notes that while the rate in the reduction of crude oil on the international market is higher than the rate of the depreciation of the kwacha, government could see how the difference can be used to mitigate the current economic crisis.
Maybe seeing this reduction in oil price as kind of some trade-off or balancing off with the devaluation of the kwacha. What I know is that as the price of crude oil reduces in the international market, government is seeing this opportunity to maintain the price. And I hope and I pray that the Energy Regulation Board will maintain the price. The only thing and the best thing they can do, given the challenges of the coronavirus, is to do some quick calculations and see how they can benefit the citizens, even if it's in a small way.
Prime Television has dragged government through the Attorney General to court over its decision to cease cooperation with the TV station for refusing to air free awareness messages on the coronavirus. The television station has also cited Topstar Communications Company Limited and MultiChoice Zambia Limited as second and third respondents. In a petition filed in the Lusaka High Court by their lawyers, LCK Chambers, Prime TV is seeking a declaration that their rights as provided for in Article 20 of the Constitution were violated, an order declaring the decision by the government to seize all transactions and businesses with the station is unconstitutional, and an order quashing the decision of the Minister of Information and Broadcasting Services to seize all cooperation with the station. The television station is also seeking an order that all media houses have the right to access and disseminate information from government without undue hindrances. It also wants compensation for the loss of income and business resulting from the statement by Topstar. Prime TV is further seeking an order that the Topstar and MultiChoice cannot remove the station from the platforms they manage at the direction of government, costs and any other relief the court may deem necessary. GEA's initiative, Zambia Executive Director McDonald Chipenzi has encouraged the people of Nangula Ward in Luena constituency in Lumulunga district to adhere to the electoral guidelines given by the Electoral Commission of Zambia ECZ as they vote in view of the coronavirus outbreak. McDonald Chipenzi says the guidelines will help the voters and stakeholders approach the vote with necessary knowledge and stamina. Mr. Chipenzi has encouraged all the eligible voters to turn out in numbers to vote for the candidate of their choice without coercion or intimidation. He says the gifts received or promises made should not maim the voters' voting judgment, but should exercise their voting rights accordingly. And the anti-voter apathy has expressed fear that the outbreak of coronavirus will affect the voter turnout in the Nangula Ward by-election in Luena constituency. AVAP Executive Director Richro Mulwani is concerned that some voters might stay home to avoid the long lines and crowded rooms.
People are very careful. They are worried that it's like there are so many people having this disease, and especially those the Chinese. We saw yesterday how those Chinese are hiding and all that. So people are really worried. You heard about the Solwezi issue. So it's very serious that I don't know what is going, what can happen, but we can see a serious problem where people not even go to line up and vote because they are fearing. So it's difficult, but again, the election has to go on because it's a constitutional matter. How do we handle this? So it's a problem that is within ourselves, but we must manage it by ensuring that people go and vote, but they must observe the distance, and they should not hold rallies where there are many people and there are campaigns going on there. It's a matter of knowing that this disease can kill, and it's a killer, indeed.
Finally, in our news, the Poultry Association of Zambia says it is working with government through the Ministry of Fisheries and Livestock to ensure that the poultry supply chain is not interrupted amidst the coronavirus outbreak. PA's Executive Manager Dominic Chanda has told Q News that this is going to be done whilst adhering to the regulations put in place by the Ministry of Health. Mr. Chanda has assured consumers that there is no need to panic buy chickens, as they will be readily available in all the outlets and markets. He has also urged farmers in the chicken business to ensure that they adhere to the biosecurity, especially small and medium-scale poultry farmers. Mr. Chanda has further called on outlets selling feed, day-old chicks and vaccines to ensure that they put in place necessary stimulation measures to prevent the spread of COVID-19.
We have continued discussing with government to ensure that the poultry industry remains an essential component of what the government is considering to be essential component, specifically to supply the food that is needed for anyone in the country. So to ensure that we have that, there are certain sectors, certain supply chains within the poultry value chain that really needs to be opened up. That is the supply of day-old chicks, the supply of vaccines, the supply of feed and feed ingredients. Some are imported, some are locally produced. For example, number 3 meal from Eastern Province into Lusaka. Those are the areas that need to be left out. On the farmers aspect, as I indicated, it's the issue of strict biosecurity to ensure that we do not allow any unnecessary movement and traffic into the farm, and to ensure that we produce a product that is competitive in the market. The consumers, I think there's no need to go into panic mode to start buying because the government will leave the industry still open. They should just go on and be able to buy in a normal way.
To end the news, we take a look at stories making headlines. Health Minister Chitalu Chilufya says the country has not recorded any new cases of coronavirus. The Zambia Revenue Authority ZRA has exceeded its first quarter revenue collection target of 13.1 billion kwacha by 63.7 million kwacha, and government has been urged to default on the country's external debt obligations in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. We end the news. Thank you for watching.